Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Punch, Kick, Choke Chat. It's Thursday night again for me here in Toronto at 8:30 p.m. Not everybody's here in Toronto with me, of course. That's the beauty of what we've been able to do with this Zoom show in what is well over a year now. My name's Sean Benson. I'm one of your hosts, and there's no better guest. There's no worse guest. I truly believe that. Every guest, including our host chat, is just a special chance for us all to come together. But I know, and we know by the number of people logging in tonight, how excited I am and we are to chat with our guest tonight, and for the work he's done in the ring and outside the ring. So I'm super excited to get to the conversation. And so I don't want to take a lot of time to say much more right now, other than to introduce one of our co-hosts, Sensei Nicholas Suino. And his palmaris reads 8th dan in Iaido, 6th dan in Judo, 6th dan in Jiu-Jitsu. It's so easy for me to just introduce him and forget what an absolute force he's been in my martial arts career. I don't train the Iaido as much, but I was training it quite steadily until he made the mistake of introducing me to groundwork. And so not only the Iaido, which I still practice, I just don't further a lot, but in my other martial art, aside from my primary karate, which will always be my first and foremost, you've had an influence that I'm not sure I've shared with you enough, Sensei Suino, and the idea that I get to call you a friend and introduce you almost so, when I say easily, I mean, oh yeah, 8th dan Iaido, 6th dan Judo. I mean, to think about what these things actually mean. And the one thing I wanted to say to you, we've touched on this in one of the shows, but in some of the ground game I've done, there's the stand up, there's the ground, but that in between, nobody has ever put hands on me like judo players, ever. Wrestlers can take me down, but no one makes me hurt like a judo throw. What's going on with that? What's going on with that? Like, what is that?
That's friendship, right? When you can make good friends and throw them on the ground really, really hard.
That's
funny,
Sean. It
Sean.
slaps different.
Right. This afternoon, I was sitting on the front deck where a bunch of us sat. Now it's got to be, 3-4 years ago, and watched the moon come up over Ann Arbor, Michigan, right? We were sitting around late into the night talking. I was just thinking about how long it's been since we all were in the same room. And I also remember the time you came down and we did a bunch of grappling. I think that was part of the Crucible, if I remember right. And, a lot of times when we're gearing up for these chats, I think about our history together. And I remember when you were a much younger man and the first time you put a bokken in your hand when I was around. Pretty cool history.
A lot of history.
Yeah, man. I love it. And I'm hoping we can do something in person again soon.
We all know it's going to be ASAP soon. ASAP,
yeah,
as soon as that border's normal. Yeah. How you doing tonight?
Man, doing great. It's been a challenging few weeks as we open up now. We're fully open here in Michigan, and so we've had to make some protocol adjustments and get rocking. But I'm happy to say that people are coming back to the dojo in droves, which is wonderful, really wonderful thing. So it falls to me when we have these chats to introduce Sensei Randy Dauphin. Many of you on this call know Randy very well. I've known Randy for well over 25 years. We've worked together in Iaido and in karate, and he's been down for our Crucible events where we do grappling and other things. Today, he and I spent some time on the phone as we were talking about the fact that he's going to test this coming Saturday with me for his 4th dan in Iaido after many, many years. And he's going to do it virtually because the border's still closed. So we were talking about the logistics of that. And I have to say, I do a lot of seminars virtually, or over the last year and a half I have, and a lot in person. And nobody has been as particular and careful about making sure that everything's right on his end. So he's got the right people in the room, he's got the right technology. He's definitely taking this seriously, as you should for a Yondan in a traditional Japanese martial art. And I'm really looking forward to that. And I'm looking forward to, through the airwaves, Randy, I'm looking forward to putting a lot of pressure on you for 2 hours just to see how you do with it.
And you just did, because at the next Punch, Kick, Choke Chat, people are going to be like, when you say, I'd like to introduce Randy Dauphin, who's a Sandan.
I will say that. Right. Listen, I'm much better at putting pressure on you in a testing situation than I am at remembering anything at all.
Well, it's exciting.
Yeah. Anyway, been dropped on my head a lot, so that's my excuse for everything these days. Randy, how you doing, man?
I'm good, and I'm the appropriate level of nervous and excited for Saturday. And it was good to talk to you today and just make sure that your expectations will be met when you log in. And I'm also super happy that Sensei Legacy and Sensei Bauer and Sensei Kettleberger and Sensei Chalky and Sensei Bear are going to be here. Those are all my seniors in Legacy Shorin-ryu. They're all coming to watch this test. So it'll be good to have them as witnesses for this. And I'm also asking Sean and Ron Watson and Robert Schlumsky, who are my 3 senior students, to be able to come and watch this. So it'll be great. I'm doing good, and I'm excited about tonight, and I'm excited about Saturday. Life is good. Every week, I always introduce Sensei Legacy and our guest, which is Mark Hominick tonight. So I'm going to start by introducing Sensei Legacy with the usual accolades that are important accolades. And, you know, Sean was talking about that. It's not every day. Like, we take it as commonplace. It's like we have karate privilege or martial arts privilege because Sensei Legacy is our instructor. He's a 10th degree black belt. He was awarded that by his teacher after more than 5 decades of training. So that's pretty cool. That in itself is something that not everybody can say, even though I know you can as well, Sensei Suino. He is a member of the Canadian Black Belt Hall of Fame. He's an author. He is a student of some of the pioneers of martial arts in North America. People like Harold Warden. Benny Allen was his teacher. Benny Allen's picture's right over there. I named my son after that man. Richard Kim, and like I said, Anthony Sandoval. And I always like to point out, because it makes the 2 of them smile, he actually did get his black belt in Iaido in Japanese swordsmanship from Sensei Suino as well, and continues to train in that art, which is great. A little bit of history about Sensei Legacy, which I was just sharing with the champ Mark Hominick in the pre-call, is that Sensei Legacy is actually one of the pioneers of combat sports in Canada. And in 1972, he fought in one of the very first full contact matches. Leo Laux was at that match. And it's funny because when I look at the pictures and the YouTube videos of that stuff, they're wearing like karate punch gear. Like, they're not even wearing like real boxing gloves and stuff. Like, they're basically hammering away with like foam dip stuff. Sensei Legacy's hit me. I can't imagine him connecting full force into my melon with a foam dip glove on his hand, even though he's hit me really hard before. I also always like to say that you'll never hear me say, oh, this is Gary Legacy. I always say, this is Sensei Legacy. He's always Sensei. I've never addressed him by his first name, and I never will. And I like to tell people that the reason why I don't, here's the analogy I like to give people. Can you imagine your dad coming up to you and saying, son, you know me well enough now that you don't have to call me dad. You can just call me Mike, right? It doesn't happen. One sensei, always sensei. And the last thing, I'm going to actually turn it over to, I always do the introduction for Sensei Legacy, but I'm going to let Sean and Sensei Suino maybe share a thought or two. But before I do, I want to say, Sensei Legacy bought me this coffee mug. He's got his Montreal jersey behind him. Go Habs, go. We're excited. Sean, how about you go first?
Okay, thanks, Sensei. You know, Sensei mentioned we were going to do this, and I thought about this. I actually want to share something really important and a little bit personal in how it unfolded. And Hanshi, you may or may not remember this, but a group of us were sitting around your house. I'm going like 20 years ago. Something just fell in my room when the train went by. It was about 20 years ago, and you were telling a joke about a guy, and the punchline of the joke was about the way he smoked. And I remember a bunch of people laughing, and it was an okay joke. I didn't laugh. And you looked at me and you took me in, and that was the moment. Your house, that was that. So 5 minutes later, I remember you just going, that wasn't a good joke. The punchline of that joke was making fun of someone. I wish I didn't tell that joke. And I remember looking at you and going, I'll let this guy teach me forever. Because in your house, at whatever age you were, hearing yourself tell a joke you might have told 10 times and going, that no longer plays, that meant the world to me as a young guy who already looked up to you. And I just thought, wow, I hope I'm always willing to take in the environment and read the room and go, yeah, that one gets retired. So I just want to say thanks for that moment, because it meant a lot to me. Ah.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. I appreciate that.
Tetsuino, what do you want to remember or share with everybody?
About your legacy?
Yeah.
Oh man, well, we've known each other a long time. I've told the story before, but it's been a few episodes. I think it was Boston, USA, 1991, 1992. I'm freshly back from Japan. There's a whole conference center full of martial artists, all angling for a new belt. The whole event was just steeped in politics, and not a lot of great martial arts for the most part. And I still remember to this day, looking over and seeing Sensei walk into the room, and he just had a whole different atmosphere about him. He was calm, deliberate, he moved differently. And as it unfolded over the weekend, he was trying to get involved in the International Martial Arts Federation. And for some reason, all the senior guys in the room were terrified of him and his involvement in the organization. And yeah, we hit it off. And the next thing I know, I'm up in Canada teaching Iaido. So that's a great memory. And for me, that's the pivotal moment when everything since has descended from that.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Well, now I'm going to introduce our guest. Super grateful that the champ Mark Hominick is willing to come on. Some of his accolades: TKO Major League Featherweight Champion, and he defended that title 3 times. That's good. A lot of people become the champ. Not everybody defends their title. He did it 3 times. I think we all know him from being the #1 contender in the UFC and his fight against Jose Aldo, Hall of Famer. And I still say, like, given 30 seconds to a minute more, that fight would have been totally different. Definitely put the champ on my radar. And in the UFC, that's one of the fights. He fought many times in the UFC, and actually 3 times he had fight of the night. And there's lots of people who fight in the UFC, never win, never get fight of the night. He did that. Not a lot of people remember that he's a good kickboxer as well. Great kickboxer. He was the ISKA Canadian Super Welterweight Champion. He was the IKF North American Super Welterweight Champion. Today, he's the president and CEO of Adrenaline MMA in London, and does a really good job there with training other fighters of all levels, not just elite athletes, fighters of all levels. When I think of the champ, I think of Adrenaline. I also think of the people that he associates himself with, people like Chris Hordecki and Sam Stout, people we were talking about before that. Also great fighters, great people. I remember when I messaged him the first time, and I said, oh, Leo Lauk said it would be okay for me to message you. Even though Mark and I knew each other in passing, I still felt a little bit shy about reaching out to him. And I started to give him this big pitch about wanting him to come on, and he just stopped me and said, look, you just got to tell me the date. I'd do anything for Leo. And I think that speaks words when somebody says something like that. When I was chatting with him over the last couple of weeks, he reminds me a lot of Jean-Yves Thériault, another great Canadian pro athlete. He's really laid back. He's just relaxed and comfortable in his own skin. He's really humble. He's super easy to talk with. I love his handle. He is one of the best handles in UFC history. Mark the Machine Hominick. And that's fucking right. The guy is a machine. I always picture you, champ, dropping down, doing your push-ups after your fights. I love it. And it's really inspirational to see that. As I said, I don't think Aldo wanted your fight to go 1 minute more. I'm not sure he wanted it to go 10 minutes more. I think he wanted to maybe stop in the middle of that last round. I did mention to you that I like the fact that you're a technique-based guy. You always had great technique. I gravitate towards the guys who are in the lighter weight classes, who have good techniques and who are tough and can just hang in there. A couple of other things I want to say is, I follow him on Instagram. I can tell you right now, the guy loves fishing, loves being out in the open as I do. And super big family man, loves his family, loves his wife, loves his kids. If you follow him at all, it just comes through in spades all the time. And the last thing I want to say is I'm really proud that I'm a martial artist with a history that links with Mark in the past. Like it goes back together. We have family roots, so to speak. I'm really proud he's a Canadian, and I'm really proud I'm a Canadian. He's the guy who makes me feel more proud to be a Canadian martial artist. So thanks, Mark, for that. That's my introduction.
Well, I appreciate that. That's very kind words, but like what, just you didn't have to do that for myself. That was very kind. But the one thing that right away about what everyone said about Sensei Legacy is just reminds me of what I kind of feel about martial arts is lineage and showing respect to lineage. And I that was pretty cool to hear your stories about the lineage you have. And that's one thing that, and I guess you kind of touched on it with me, with Leo or Sean. I'm a big advocate of remembering the lineage you came from and showing respect to that. So that was nice to see you guys do that for Sensei Legacy.
Awesome.
That's amazing. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping and then we'll get going. So first off, everybody watching, we want your questions. Y'all tuned in for a reason, and some of it's to watch, but we got the chat button at the bottom of the screen. And tonight, Andre's running our show. So if you drop in a question there, it'll go to him. And assuming the question's not utter bullshit, we might get it. And then if we get it, we'll pass it on to the champ. The other thing is, you hear me making fun, swearing a little bit. And this is a show of 5 adults. And you just get to tune in. So you might hear some things that are a bit off color, that are a bit whatever. Just put yourself in the back seat and listen. And I don't want to take much time with this, but Hanshi Legacy and Sensei Dofan, I was clearing out old emails, and I found the email from 2011. I sent you both telling you how well my job was going in France because I learned from you two how to sit in the back seat and just be a part of and not the center of all the time. So to those of you who may or may not enjoy the languaging tonight, enjoy the fucking languaging tonight. And Andrea's just put up, you should see at the bottom of your screen a red 1. And if you click on that, it'll show you where to put your questions in. That said, let's get started. How you doing tonight, champ? It's a real honor to have you here tonight.
All good. I appreciate that. Is at the gym today, obviously stinks for everybody in any small business and martial arts and fitness included. We're doing our online classes and whatnot. And finally we got finished the online schooling, as my kids got the report cards today, I was happy to see that mess is over. And yeah, all good. Good day as always.
Right on. So what I like to start with, and what we start with most of our guests, is pretty straightforward. Tell us what it was like for you growing up, what sort of stimulated you or got you peaked toward the martial arts, and what led you into that first dojo, club, fitness facility. What was that for you?
So I was always an athletic kid and like contact. Obviously, like most Canadian kids, I was involved in hockey as a youngster, and I always, got a lot of fights on the ice and like the body contact. But I always loved martial arts. I love martial arts movies and like any kind of combat, like boxing or any martial arts at all. But how I got involved in martial arts was my grade 9 gym class went to a local martial arts studio for like a trial week. I signed up that night, and within 2 weeks I was competing. So like I always say is I found my passion instantly. The second I stepped on the mats, I knew this is what I was looking for. And from that day forward, my life absolutely changed. And there wasn't a moment of the day that I wasn't thinking about training or martial arts until I went to bed, and it started again the next morning. So yeah, it was again grade 9 gym class, went as a group, and I went back that night with my mom. She wasn't a big fan of me joining a martial arts class. I think she stayed in the sensei's office as I did my first class, but I signed up, and that the rest is history.
And what was the club? What was the martial art? Are you still in touch?
It's called
with them at all?
Rickness. So Sensei Brad Hudson. So he was involved in Taekwondo as a black belt, and then got into Jeet Kune Do. So he made his own style called Rickness, so realistic individual combat martial arts system. So it was basically at that point was a hybrid mixed martial arts. So we were learning striking, we were learning grappling, we were learning submissions. So right from the start, I was into, basically a modified mixed martial arts, form of martial arts. You know, it was a little bit by the end of I primarily came up more as a grappler, actually. Like, you know, we did the local jiu-jitsu tournaments and whatnot first. So that would have been my first tournament was in jiu-jitsu.
So that tournament 2 weeks later, that was Jets.
Yeah, so I went in and the first match, the kid shot in on me, and if everybody knows a guillotine choke is someone's like trying to tackle you, and you basically get the neck caught in your arm, and you choke them underneath your armpit. So I finished the guy in like 15 seconds. So I thought, oh, this is a piece of cake. Yeah, I got this. So I took off the gi because that would that would have been 1997. So, you know, it was rather new too, and you could fight with the gi or no gi. So I took the gi off. I'm like, well, I'm gonna do the next match. I would have been 13 years old in my white tank top. So I took the guy down, and then the guy grabbed me by both sides of my tank top, squeezed, and then all of a sudden I remember the referee waking me up, saying, hey, you gotta wake up here. It choked me unconscious. So my mom definitely was not a fan of the martial arts after that match.
So in 2 weeks of joining, you got a first full sub and you got choked out, unconscious. So you kind of got it all out of the gate.
Yeah. So it wasn't the greatest ending to the day, but
so
it was a good
around
start.
Yeah, like 97, you know, I remember that period. I started in 93, and a buddy of mine ran a video store in London, one called Flicks, and he shot me the first UFC on video. Were you aware of that organization at the time? Did you know?
Like, oh, for sure. Like I remember probably 95 or whenever they did the New Year's, where they showed the first 6 UFCs, like the highlights of UFC 1 through 6. And I remember sneaking the video into my house. Because like I you know, my mom was not strict, but like she was like, I wasn't allowed to watch the scary movies or anything growing up, you know, like, so I remember having to sneak in the UFC, because that was definitely not going to see the light of the day in my house. And that was, you know, another thing that really triggered my interest. Like, I was like, this is incredible. Like, I didn't know what was going on by any means, but I was obviously a fan of Hoist Gracie. So, you know, when I went to that first night or first day with my high school class and seeing jiu-jitsu, I'm like, oh, this is what, you know, Hoist Gracie did. And then I was, oh, this is what I want to do.
Yeah, right on. And I don't want to jump too far ahead out of the gate, but how does it feel knowing that you're on highlight reels that other parents are telling their kids they can't watch?
Yeah, no, it's pretty neat. But the thing is, now the times have changed now, because now it's like with YouTube, and it, like my daughters show their friends. It's like it's pretty easy access to find. But the thing is also, it's pretty easy to not just seeing fights I won, but fights I lost. So, you know, I'm gonna have to delete those off the internet.
So tell us a little how that journey went, and also I know Sensei Dauphin always loves to know, and he can expand on it a bit. Who do you remember from that early couple years? You know, who are the names of the guys or the women who kept you tough, kept you honest?
First and foremost, without a question, was Carlos Newton. You know, like you show up at this jiu-jitsu tournament and you see this guy with dreadlocks, beyond fit, and he's doing like flying arm bars and submitting guys in like 10 seconds. I'm like, this is the coolest guy I've ever seen in my life. And I remember he was wearing, in between his matches, he was wearing a hooded sweatshirt under his gi. And every single time that I didn't have to wear my uniform at the dojo, I'd wear my hooded sweatshirt underneath. It didn't matter if it was summer and 35 degrees outside. I just, you know, he was my first, you know, hero, was Carlos Newton for sure.
He's a legend. He's an
And
absolute
then
legend.
outside of that, the guy he would have about my size, but like he was a man at that point. Like I was a kid, and he was the one dominating in all the, you know, adult matches. Was Richard Nanku. So Richard Nanku, same idea, just his style. He was submitting guys in like 10 seconds, 15 seconds with flying triangle, flying arm bars. And sure enough, you know, when I was about 15 years old, I moved up to fighting in the kids division, and I was like, I want to fight the adults. So at 15, I'm like, oh, I'm going to go into the black belt division against Richard Nanku. And he broke my arm in, I want to say 10 seconds.
Ooh.
In the gi division. So I'm going to sign up for the no gi division. And I had the broken arm. So he did the exact same thing with the exact same arm in the no gi division. So it wasn't a real, again, good start to that. But my pro debut, guess who it ended up being against? Richard Nanku. And that's when I won this belt. So it was kind of like a passing of the torch. Is like, you know, he was, again, under Carlos, was one of my first heroes, first idols that I looked up to. And, you know, when I made my pro debut in MMA, that's who I fought. And that's who I felt it was kind of like a passing of the torch situation.
Mark, how do you feel about that? As a guy, you know, I've read GSP's book, and when he talks about fighting Matt Hughes and how he lost to him the first time, this is what it's reminding me of.
Yeah.
And then he had to go in there and like just really, like, how did it feel to have to, I don't know, I don't want to say kill your legend, but
yeah,
surpass your hero?
So when I retired, he was one of the first persons I messaged. I reached out and told him, you know, what an impact he had on me growing up. And again, like I said, and it kind of shocked him to even think like this is after a decade of fighting all over the world in the UFC and in Japan and all these things, that, you know, I came back and he was the first person I reached out to, just saying how much he really influenced me and motivated me as a kid. And, you know, and again, like it did suck, you know, like looking back, you know, beating, you know, I don't want to say that, but like beating him, but it did, like, you know, you beat one of your idols, and that's, it's tough, you know, at the end of the day. But, you know, I did want him to know the impact he had on me, you know, to motivate me to get to that level and move on.
Question I want to ask you, and then I'm going to throw it to Hanshi Legacy and Sensei Suino. You know, you're pretty young, you get your arm broken, you keep fighting. How important is it to be able to do that? And can you train that, or do you just have that innate?
You know, and that's like, I mean, I'm sure you guys know, like, there's a fighter's heart. And that's, it's like that when I explain it to some students as well, like, you know, let's say they froze under pressure or whatever, they, you know, kind of back down in a fight. It's very similar to a dog, right? When you back a dog into a corner, the dog is going to either put his tail between his legs or he's going to show his teeth and fight, right? And again, I mean, obviously you can train all the techniques, have all the skills, all the skill set, but if you don't have that inner dog, when you get put in those situations, a lot of guys are going to put their tail between their legs. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. Again, that's an instinct that is in you, right? It can be brought out over years of just, you know, being in scenarios where you build that toughness. But again, a lot of that inner bite is within you, I feel.
Have you seen The Smashing Machine, the Mark Kerr documentary?
Yes, and I knew him personally for a while, so that, you know, that was hard to watch.
Yeah, and early on though, when he's doing well in the movie, he talks about that very thing. That when someone hurts you, do you have that thing that says, I am now going to hurt them back double? Hanshi, what are your thoughts on that? The idea, like getting an arm broken as a kid or getting a rib broken as an adult when you're new, like, and keeping going. Like, do you train that, or is that instinct? Where's that come from? How important is that?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I actually think you do train it, because it's like anything else, you know. When you're a little kid, you go out, you walk bare feet on the stones, and then when you get older, you just get used to it. Like, I know it's getting an arm broken or getting knocked out. I mean, I've been knocked out a few times, and I hate to say it this way, but you kind of get used to it. Not get used to it, but you're familiar with the feeling, so you don't panic. You know you're going to be okay. Plus, there's a referee and that in there, and you're pretty well kept safe. You know, you sort of have that in the back of your head that the referee is there to save you. And a street fighter would be different.
What about you, Sensei Suino? You want to add anything to that? Thanks, Hanshi.
Well, no, I think I agree that you do train it, right? I mean, I think everybody has a certain amount of that innate, and then you train it. We've been talking about, in fact, we talked about that last week, right? People come into martial arts, at first the pain and the falling or whatever it is scares them, right? The speed, and then little by little, right? At that, you punch me. Well, I felt some pain, but I'm moving on, and then if the thing you are doing you love enough, then you get an injury, you heal from it, and you come back and do it again. Yeah.
Sensei Dauphin, you want to add anything, or should we?
I agree with all of that, but the one thing I will say, you got to have a different type of fighter's heart to go in against somebody like Jose Aldo. And I'm not just trying to pump up the champ here, but that's a different type of scary, right? Like, we're not talking about fighting in the dojo necessarily. Like, I've had my toughest fights with Sensei Legacy in the dojo, but it is something different when you're going to get on an airplane and you're going to fly to another country. That person doesn't give one rat's ass about you, and they're just going to try and get through you because you're in the way of something that they want. I think the average person doesn't want to do something like that. I think fighters are the ones who want to do things like that.
I agree with both there. It's just like, but yeah, like Sensei Legacy was saying, is like being prepared is also always going to, when you've been there before. That's what I mean. Like when you've trained so long and so hard, you've been in the scenario where you have been tired, you have been hurt. So it's not a new scenario. What I was saying about the arm being broken is like, that was the first time I've ever been in that scenario where someone snapped my arm. That's what I'm saying is like, well, that's instant. That happened for the first time. That's how I reacted. Right. But when you're talking about, say, you're getting ready for a title bout or a bout, where say you get hit with a body shot and you have to recover. If you haven't done that in training, how can you say that you're going to recover from that? You've been in that scenario before. You've trained, you've prepared for that. So I guess I know I'm playing both sides of the story there, but that's where I agree with both there.
So then let's talk about that idea about the punching and kicking a little more, because you have a 21-0 kickboxing record, but it sounds like out of the gate you were being taught more, maybe focusing a bit more on the grappling skills. Was that a conscious pivot, or was that, oh no, those other skills just took a little longer to develop, but they were always part of the game?
No, there's one name, and that's Sean Tompkins. That's when I went from here to here, right? The second, so at that point, when I was competing in all these tournaments and got into pancration, which is like the bare knuckle, like Greek martial art, where it was MMA, no striking to the face, but there was both grappling and striking. And I could see, especially on the higher level, when I was competing, internationally, that I was slacking in the striking. Like, I was primarily more of a grappler then, and I knew I had to get better at striking. And I had heard about this guy, Sean Tompkins, in Tillsonburg, and I was training in Ingersoll, Ontario. The relation is about 15-minute drive from there. And then, I got to go check him out. The second I met Sean Tompkins, I wasn't a grappler, I was a kickboxer. And my path, my vision, my inspiration, my mentor completely pivot to that. And that's there's one word to that, Sean Tompkins.
Sensei Suino, I see you really nodding and connecting with that. You want to run with that?
I just wanted to, this is a question I want. So before this show, I was watching some of your highlights and fights, and I watched the Kikuchi fight, the shoot boxing fight, right? And I love that for some fighting reasons, but also just because it reminds me of my experiences living in Japan and going out on the mat with judo players. I never competed like that, but being in a foreign place, hearing the foreign voices. And one of the things I think the Japanese are really good at is just being dispassionate. Like, they're not necessarily, like on the judo mat, they're not there to hurt you. They're not necessarily there to help you either. Like, they're doing their judo. You happen to be the guy across from them. And just a minute ago, we were talking about you flying, internationally. What was that like? What was the experience like the first time you went to Japan, for example, and found yourself in a new country, fighting strangers, listening to the different language? Can you talk about that a little bit?
So first off, when I got involved in martial arts, my goal is not to fight in the UFC. My goal is to fight in Japan. So that was a lifelong martial artist goal, was to go and compete in Japan. Like I said, it wasn't like fighting for the UFC title. It was, I wanted to fight in Japan. So it was the coolest experience I've ever had. you know, but again, we had a 13-hour or whatever, I think it's 13-hour flight over there. The second we land, it's night and day, right? We had to get off the plane and then we had to weigh in and then we had to fight the next day. So it was just like, okay, like, so we are on no sleep. I didn't cut any weight because I knew that was going to be the case. And one experience I thought was unique and very special is that when you're in the ring, the crowd was completely silent. And I thought that was, first, that was shocking and very like almost like mystic, like I was like looking around, like, is there anybody here? But then as soon as you did see a nice kick or a nice sweep or any strike, they'd applaud, regardless if you were, you know, I fought a local fighter, like he was the #1 ranked guy in Japan at that time. And if I did something that they were impressed with, they would cheer. And I thought that was incredible. And then after, like, just like the respect that went both ways was all about, like, it just spoke what martial arts is all about. And afterwards, another experience I'll never forget is that we went to this, it's called the Fight Bar. And it's just little, you go down, like everything's smaller there, you remember that, but you go down into the basement of this bar, and the whole bar is, all it is photos of famous fighters that had been in there. And it was like, you know, whether it was pro wrestling to you know, traditional martial artists, to mixed martial artists, to kickboxers. And it was just like a lot of my heroes and idols like on the wall. It was just pretty cool. And then they let me sign the wall. And I just thought that was pretty unique. And that's something that I'll never, you know, you never get to experience again. It was pretty amazing.
Awesome.
Next time we go to Japan, I'm going to find that bar and I'm going to go take a picture with your signature.
So backing up just a touch, at what point did you go, hey, I'm pretty good at this. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna go be a pro at this. I'm not just a hobbyist.
Yeah, I don't want, like, I mean, I was pretty full blown as soon as I started like my first class, all I wanted to do was compete. You know what? I don't want to say I ever thought this would be my profession. But I always knew I wanted to compete against anybody who wanted to step in there with me. So but yeah, again, I never said I wanted to do this as a job. Like I went to the University of Windsor, where I studied business, and I was going there to get a business degree, and but again, every weekend I get on a bus and travel somewhere and go compete, and then come back on Monday morning, sit in the front row of class with a pair of black eyes, and then do it again the next weekend. So it went, like, again, I wasn't like, I knew I always wanted to compete against whoever, wherever, in the highest level I could, but I didn't see it, this is going to be my job. It wasn't until my first year after university, I came back to the dojo with Sean Tompkins, and he was on the phone, and he just had this look like on his face, like something's just happened, you know, something special just happened, and we got the call to compete against Richard Nanku for the Canadian title in the pro mixed martial arts fight. It was the first time I've ever fought for money, fought in a professional bout, but I was fighting for the Canadian title against the person who broke my arm when I was a 15-year-old.
So how'd that come about? How'd you get to leap up to that title fight out of the gate?
So Sean had competed in UCC. He fought David Wiseau and a couple of the other original, you know, mixed martial art, you know, heroes in Canada. And he knew the promoter had known that Sean had this young kickboxer, which was myself, like, who was competing, kind of willing to fight anybody. Then there was a last minute injury, you know, like a month before the bout. They kind of reached out to Sean, hey, heard about this, you know, Mark Hominick kid. He's doing all these things in kickboxing. Do you think he'd fight MMA? And Sean was like, Sean didn't even ask me. He's like, oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. So that's how that happened.
And did you have to mentally do any transition for that? Like, or was it just like, that's kind of what I've been doing since grade 9?
It wasn't even that's why Sean didn't even have to ask me. He knew the answer, and Yeah, you didn't have to ask me.
One of my students who can't be on the call tonight, but I know he wants to know around this idea, and I think it's a great time to ask this question. If you're talking to a pure stand-up striker, classical karate person, what would you say is the key mental shift they have to make going into either what we'll call that could go to the ground street fight, or even what Sensei Dauphin talked about? You're going to jump in against someone who does not give a shit because you're in the way.
Sorry, can you ask that again? I didn't quite.
Yeah, like somebody who's doing a sort of classical pure martial arts stand-up striking.
Yeah.
What's the mental shift that someone like that has to make to either get in the ring the way you did or face that guy in the street who wants to tackle you?
I think preparation, and like if you're prepared and trained, I mean, I never second guessed anything because I knew I'd done the work, like that. And again, maybe like that's a confidence thing or whatever, but the more work I put in, the more confident I would always be. And if you look back at any of the bouts that I had lost, I'm looking back and I'm thinking those every one of those bouts before the fight or in preparation, there's always a thing in the back. Oh, what if, right? But the fights that I went in there were like, there's no way this guy's, gonna do that to me, right? Like or not even what he's gonna do. This is what I'm gonna do, right? It was just the confidence, and that I think came from training and just being prepared. Sometimes I guess being prepared for the unknown is tough, but again, if you put in the work, I think my confidence always was at its strongest.
Sensei Dauphin, I know you're smiling on the inside, and I saw you smile a little because I know you love this answer. You want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, well, I 100% agree with what he's saying. And I think it goes back to what Sensei Legacy said. I guess what I would say is if you've been punched in the face a lot of times, when somebody threatens you with that, it doesn't really frighten you quite the same way as if you've never been punched in the face before, right? Our club's a great club. We got tough people in our club. Our black belts fight hard. Like, you get broken ribs here and bloody noses and black eyes and chipped teeth. So then, yeah, when somebody else says they're going to do that to you, or you think that might happen, you've been there before and done it, so it's okay.
Thanks.
I will say though that I think the average person they're not like the champ, or maybe not even like one of us. Like, you get your arm broken, a lot of people are going to just say, yeah, that was nice, I'm going back to Atari, right? Yep. Like, or, the number one question I always got at work after I had like a huge black eye is, why do you do that? Like, they just can't. Why do you do that? Why do you want to do that? Why is that fun to you? But it is.
We got a question coming in, and then we're going to jump to our 10 questions, champ. So this is from Sensei Conroy Copeland. He's been a guest on the show. Yep. We all just respect and love him. And the question is, and this goes to what you're talking about with that mental state, do you think the butterfly ever goes away when you get into the ring, the butterflies?
Oh, no. I mean, like some people, I think the guys that thrive under that butterfly are the ones that are, always are the champion. But yeah, no, you always, like, the people who say, oh, I was never nervous, I just go in there and yeah, there's always nerves. There's always the unknown. But again, a lot of people thrive on that. And a lot of people need that, to perform, right? When they feel that, that's where they feel the pressure, and they love the pressure. And for myself, I always, I grew up playing hockey, a team sport. But when I got involved in martial arts and competing in martial arts, that's when I realized I loved the individual sport. Like, without question, there's a team and support system behind you. But, the individual sports is where I feel I love. And again, like, when I think about the activities I do, I love individual activities as well. Like, like fishing or whatever, running. Like, I love running because it's you in the road, right? Like, I love that. And having that pressure that, hey, you know what? It's on you. It's up to you to perform. It's not, oh, well, this guy should have done that, or that guy should have done that. Like, I like that pressure. And I now when I look at the big picture, I look at my life and like obviously I love my family, like spending time with them. But again, like the activities that I like I love to run, I love to fit, like it's all a lot of individual things. And again, that's when the pressure's on you.
Sean, I have a question before you do the 10, but I don't want to interrupt you if you want to build on that.
I don't actually. This is all you.
Okay. Mark, I have a question for you. Just out of curiosity, you were in martial arts a lot, but then all of a sudden you find yourself in the UFC, right? And so we talked about the first time you went into a club and trained. I'm curious to know what it's like the first time you're at a venue like that. I have a couple of questions about that. What's it like the first time walking out? Was the UFC just like everything else, or was there any difference there?
So I think the best way to describe that was when I fought for the world title, and when I fought against Jose Aldo, because like you competed in smaller shows or large enough shows, but when I fought him, it was 55,000 people, fighting for a world title. No matter how many competitions or hours in the gym, that's something I'd never experienced before. So I can say, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do this. But again, that was something I'd never done before, right? Being in front of that big a crowd, that big of pressure, the TV, the pay-per-view, the world title, like all those are all first. Those are all things that I've never done before. And I can say all I want, I'm going to go do this, but you cannot say that because you've never been in that situation. I remember walking into the ring and, I just tunnel vision, I get in there and then I see my opponent. I look at him and I just said to myself, I've been here before. So that's I guess the best way to describe that is like, once I got into this scenario where I'm looking across the ring or the cage against my opponent, and I've been there before.
Did you ever have any interactions with UFC vets who pulled you aside and said, hey guy, here's a piece of advice for you here that you took to heart and you...
There's so... You know what, like I always felt it's through Sean, like Sean always led by example. And I thought that was what good leaders do. So I would say through Sean is where I took all that to heart, is because he led by example, which a lot of people, whether the leaders of the country or leaders of a business or whatever, a lot of people say one thing, but they don't do the other, or they don't do what they're preaching, right? Where Sean really did is that he led by example. And that's one thing that I try to instill in my students and people that may ask me for advice, is that some like actions speak louder than words. So the actions you make are going to influence your students and people following you or asking for advice.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually, before we do our 10 questions, I just want to expand on that since we jumped into the UFC for a sec. What are your Dana interactions? What's your takeaway from the guy running the show?
He's even to this day, like he's just got an aura about him, like like it's almost like you're nervous around him. We were always like he had probably a better relationship with Sam. Like him and Sam Stout, a training partner, like they really had a good relationship. But yeah, like I always felt like he always had an aura about him where you're always trying to impress them, right? Or didn't know where you stood with him, right? He had that kind of aura about him, and he still does, right? He was always very nice and respectful and whatnot. But yeah, it was one of those things like the guy that you're scared of the boss type thing at work.
Sure.
Yeah, no, he still has that kind of aura about him.
Yeah, I hear that.
Yeah. Sean, before we go to the questions, I just don't want this call to go by without talking about training a little bit. We've been talking about kind of the life and the beginnings and the history, but we really haven't talked much about physical training. And I just want to frame it by saying, Mark, a lot of I watch a lot of your stand-up, and and they called you the machine for a reason. You're able to move in great balance, to move in and out, to throw punches at the appropriate force level without overcommitting. It's very enjoyable to watch. Clearly, that didn't happen by accident. Can you talk a little bit about your training regime? Like what were the styles you trained in, and how did you develop that sense of poise during your stand up?
So my timing, like obviously, like Sean was, my kickboxing coach and kickboxing instructor. But I feel when I went to university, I started training. I don't know if you guys know the name Charlie Stewart. He's a boxing trainer out of Windsor, Windsor Amateur Boxing. He's trained multiple Olympians, and that's where I felt I really got, my timing and speed and accuracy, and a lot of it came back to the way they were training. Like I love the kind of military aspect of training, where it's you did things at this time and this time, like it was very regimented. And the thing there, which I always like, is that you sparred at 5:30 in the morning on Monday, and you couldn't come to the afternoon practice if you didn't come to the sparring. Then the next day at 5 in the morning, we did wind sprints. You didn't come to that, you couldn't come to the afternoon practice. Like I just like the regimen again. But I think sparring with those guys is where I really developed a lot of, my hand speed and accuracy and boxing technique. Because I think that's where, like what you're talking about, was like the timing and accuracy came from that. Like just working with some super high level guys, and sometimes you got to take a licking in the gym, to get to improve. And those guys definitely did it to me. Because
if you're coaching somebody on that, what are some of the things you're telling them to think about, like as they're moving in, as they're moving out? What are they looking for? Do you bring it out? Do you talk about it specifically, or do you just let them practice?
I think it's repetition. Like you're not. I don't think you can develop any skill overnight. And it sometimes it may seem tedious that you're doing a lot of the same drills or same footwork or same pad work or whatever the skills that you're doing, but like preparation equals success, and you have to prepare over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And I think that's a lot of it. Is just being that you're never going to stop practicing that one technique.
We just keep blowing off our questions, but this is too good. Talk about weight cuts. What's that for you? How were they, and are they tough? Or what is that?
I always thought if the biggest thing about your training camp is making weight, you got bigger problems than I had. My biggest problem was being in shape and ready to fight, not about how many pounds I could cut. Like I was like, if I ever fought a guy who missed weight, I didn't care one bit, because he wasn't prepared. I thought that's a mental win already. So I'm an advocate actually against the whole weight cutting thing. I think your job in training camp should be training to win a fight, not cutting weight. So like I try to coach my guys to show up on weight. Like I don't think the biggest concern in the fight should be making weight. It should be about the fight.
Love that. I know we all love that.
I love that.
Hanchi Legacy?
Yeah. For those who intend to get into full contact fighting, it's not like classical karate fighting. Have you ever been hit so hard, or have you ever been hurt to the point where you didn't think you could continue, but you kept going anyway? And how did that turn out? And is it necessary to be a tough guy as opposed to just an offensive fighter? Like, in order to stay in the ring, is it important for you to get yourself used to being banged around in the ring?
Yeah, you definitely, like, sparring is a big aspect of it. But if I guess I'm not a massive fan of Floyd Mayweather, but if you look at his career, the reason why he's still healthy and competing even at 44, even like the last fight was a joke, is because of his defensive minded skill, right? Yeah. So like his defense is what's made him stay the longevity, right? Where you look at other fighters who have serious damage because of their toughness. So sometimes being that tough guy is going to make your career shorter. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't really fall into that category, because if you look at, you know, a lot of my fights, I was in a lot of drag out fights, and, you know, like took a lot of punishment in a lot of fights that, you know, because I liked that, like that kind of dogfight where you're in the trenches, because I thought that's where I did best, is in those trenches. But again, it does take its toll, and it shortens your career in that way. So sometimes being a tough guy is great, but it's also going to take its toll on your body and your career and your body in general. If that answered your question, right?
That's basically it. I just sort of wanted to get a ratio on how you think your fighting is. Like, is it you have to be so much offensive, so much defense, or does that just happen?
For myself, I'm more prone. I love to move forward, right? Like I love to press the fight, right? Where other guys, they're more counter fighters. So a lot of it depends on the individual, right? But like I like myself, I always love to move forward and engage in the fight. And again, like you can be trained one way, but because I've trained other some fighters that are so good offensively, but they just don't have that will to engage, right? So that they're forced to almost fight a style that they're not, like they're better if they were offensive, but they don't have that in them to kind of take the step forward, where they're more prone to being on the outside and being defensive.
Well, you're a real interesting age with that, right? Because a lot of the younger fighters who I listen to in interviews, they talk a lot more about flow, light sparring. You got to know you can take a hit, but you don't really have to do it much during a camp, if at all, compared to the guys 10, 15 years older than you who were bangers. So where do you go with that? Like if you were fighting today, or if you were 20 today, how would you be approaching that training compared to how you did it?
100% agree with that, because like training in I'm just saying through mixed martial arts, but it has changed dramatically. We used to spar 3 times a week, and when I'm talking spar, I'm talking like people are getting knocked out in training sessions. To now, you look at Max Holloway, who's a champ at my weight class at 145. He doesn't even spar anymore before his fights, which is insane. Like, you know, for me, I'm like, how does he get ready? And like, he's just saying like the longevity in his career and staying safe and healthy is because he's not taking those blows in training. And I hear that from so many fighters. Like, I don't want to say in my era, because it's not like I fought it 10 years ago. So it's not like that far behind. But again, though our guys, we were sparring 3 times a week and heavy sparring. And also, one thing that I would coach guys, maybe if anything, sparring once a week, but also the recovery. That's one thing I never did is recovery. And I'm really, you know, you don't ever regret anything, but it would have been nice if I had done a little bit more recovery and, you know, mobility training than just the, you know, the grind, that you know, the pushing yourself harder than the guy beside you every day. Sometimes you need to recover harder than the guy beside you.
Right. So we're on to our 10 questions now, which is what we ask all our guests. Answer as impulsively as you can, but then feel free to expand as you wish. What's the most effective move in your martial arts arsenal?
Jab.
Who is the most influential martial artist in your life?
Sean Tompkins.
Who do you think is the most influential martial artist of all time, and why?
Bruce Lee, just because he was really, if you think about it, he was the first person to think about mixed martial arts, not a typical style of martial arts. He was open to learning other styles.
What excites you most about the next 5 years of your martial arts?
Coaching young hungry athletes.
if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you get there?
You're invited.
Who's your favorite film and TV martial artist?
Ooh. Hey, I like Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Who is the martial artist, living or dead, in all time, all of history, who you'd like to train with the most?
Oof, that one's Raymond Deckers, a Dutch kickboxer. Incredible. Like what I think the best ever.
Awesome. If everyone in the world could have the greatest benefit you've gotten from martial arts, whether they train or not, what would you be giving them?
Oh, the lifestyle of a martial artist is just, you have this, when you speak to other people that are passionate about martial arts, you know it.
Mm.
So just introducing them to the passion of what a real martial artist is and what they live and breathe and feel every day.
What's your greatest achievement? What's your greatest regret?
My family. I don't want to say you have regrets, because you learn from mistakes you made in the past.
So let me jump into my question about that really, famous fight we're talking about here, because I think, anybody who watches that fight goes, yeah, pretty much the judges made the right call, but everyone also goes, for fuck's sake, another minute and we believe we'd have had a new champ. Do you sit with that gnawing for a while and have to get over that? Do you walk away from that quickly? What was that for you?
100% not. No, like for what I felt I showed in that fight is that fight showed who I was as a martial artist, as a man, and the work I had done for the last 20 years. 2 weeks after that fight, I had my first daughter, and I never won again. Before that fight, I hadn't lost in 3 years before I fought for the world title. After that fight, I never won again, and I retired. So that just proved to me that I got to show who I was as a martial artist, the work I had put in, the heart, the dedication, the training, the commitment, the man I was, the heart I had. And I got to show that without walking away as a champion, because at that point, that was my kind of, walking off into the sunset.
Fucking love that answer. I love that. That's the best, champ. I love that.
Thanks.
Sorry, I want to know what's the day after like a fight like that, champ? What's the day after like, and how many days after do you have to go through after a fight like that?
Yeah, that one was different because I had my daughter 2 weeks later, right? So it was like the next morning, obviously wasn't the prettiest guy in the mirror, but also there's another priority that I had, and that was my oncoming daughter. So that also proves that, it was because, like, I remember for 20 years going to bed thinking about training and what I had to do the next day in training, and waking up thinking the exact same thing. Where, after that fight, there wasn't that thought when I woke up. It was a different thought. I mean, obviously training and what I had to do in that aspect was a part of it, because I still competed for another couple of years after that. But I had other things in my mindset, right? Where I did not, I'm not joking when I say that, for 20 years, like that was my only thought all day, every day was training and competing.
So when a couple of years pass and you're not winning the fights the way you had been, you just knew? I mean, it's such an incredible thing to walk away, I think, clear and knowing that that's not your thing. Some guys don't do that.
Nope. And again, and I'm one of those, like, no matter what I do in life, I'm all in or all out. And I knew this was time to, because I'm not going in there to compete. I'm going in there to win and compete against the best. I'm not doing this just to be in the UFC or just to do this. I'm not doing it just to do it. It's to be a champion. And at that point I knew, you know, that was not the best version of myself. And so I'm not going to go in there half of anything.
And this is a great time for one of the questions that came through from Christiana Altamiron, which is there a fight in the professional level that sticks out as a fight that taught you the most, whether it's about yourself or actually just your technical fighting?
Well, my first loss, I fought, at this point I was 3-0, was a Canadian champion. You know, I'd won all 3 fights by finish. And then I went to Ohio, I think it was, and fought Mike Brown. The guy was much bigger, much stronger, and he literally beat the shit out of me for 5 rounds. And I remember, like, he was like a state champion of wrestling. At this point, I couldn't even spell wrestling, especially on that level, you know. And he was mounted on me and, like, just like I said, just pounding on me. And I remember saying to myself in my head, I'm like, I know I'm not getting out of this, but I also know I'm not giving up. Right. So he like, it was bad. And this is back when, you know, the borders were a little looser and whatnot. And I remember after the fight, I, you know, just went to the back and I kind of fell over, and everyone's like, we got to get him back to Canada. So they get me in the van and get to the border at Windsor. And they're like, you know, asking the questions. They just opened the back gate of the van, and my head was just swollen. They're like, get him to a hospital. So that's when I knew that, you know, I'm this is what I meant. Like, I'm a fighter, and I meant to be fighting. I had a few skills to learn at that point, but I knew that this is, you know, like I'm in there to win and compete, and I'm not going to be broken.
So this brings up a question I'm really curious about, and I'd like to hear, we'll start with Hanshi, then Sensei Suino, and then Sensei Dauphin, but I want to start with you. In the various ways that everyone I'm going to ask fights, what's the worst physical position you found yourself in? Like, what's the one where when it happens, you go, are you fucking kidding me?
When someone got on my back.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I always, yeah, when someone got on my back going for a chokehold, I just that was one skill set I always had trouble with. And especially a high level guy, especially when you're fighting like WC or UFC, when you get a black belt in jiu-jitsu on your back, it's like an anaconda. And I always had trouble there for myself.
Mm-hmm. And at the time or now, are you ranked as a jiu-jitsu guy, or was that just part of your grappling skills? Or is that something you specifically are moving through the system of?
Yeah, like I've always been trained in grappling. It's just that was a skill set that I always had trouble with. Yeah. Is someone when they had on my back.
What about you, Hanshi Legacy? What's a position you found yourself in when fighting where you're like, how the fuck did I end up here?
Well, I never quite did what Mark did, but I remember one time I was fighting Billy Hines for the in Toronto. I forget the name of the place. And I was fighting with him. We were into the 3rd overtime period. And he just shifted in and started this really fast punch. And I blocked down so fast, I thought, he will never get by this. And then he just put his arm out like this. And, you know, it's point karate, but that was a bad position. I felt bad there. But again, it's not the same kind of thing that would be confronted with.
Sensei Suino?
Well, I guess I'd go back to just, maybe this is the answer, the most painful positions. And it seems like over the years of grappling, when you grapple against a catch wrestler, everything they do, you know, judo guy can hold you down, you can't move, right? BJJ guy can submit you, but catch wrestlers, every move they do hurts, right? So they're not only rolling you over or pinning you. While they do it, they're doing some bizarre stuff that I don't understand, and it hurts. It's twisting your joints, it's crushing you, and it just sucks. So pretty much every time I've ever grappled a catch wrestler, there's been lots of pain and all kinds of mysterious positions. Let's put it that way.
Right on. Sensei Dauphin?
It'd probably be similar to what Mark said. Well, the worst position is when you are on your back and you open your eyes and people are looking down at you. That's actually the worst position. But the position that I like to avoid as much as possible is the one before that happens. And it's usually when somebody gets you to commit on a certain line and then slips off of that line and you lose track of where they are. And you just know, like, if you turn towards that person, there's nothing you can do. You're powerless. Like, you got to either run on the line that you are to try and get away from them. But if you're a person who, like the champ says, likes to engage and you turn, I don't like looking over my left shoulder to where the person is. I like to keep them like right there. So I'd say for me, that's the worst position to be, is when you commit to a line and you're looking over your shoulder to see where they've gone to.
Right on. Thanks for that. Yeah, I'll just chip in real quick. I mean, I haven't done 1/100th of the intensity of any of y'all, but when it happens with you, Sensei, when you do enough things that I tense up and I know that whatever's coming next, I've tensed too much and I'm too slow to react to. And in that moment, I'm just like, fucking get me out of here. This is going to be hell. Because no matter what, I can't react in time because I went too far this way. And that's coming from this side.
Question. Sean, I want to ask a question that I asked. I asked this to Jean Terrio, different people. How'd you get your moniker, champ? Who named you the machine? Did you pick that yourself or did your mom pick that?
No, so, well, one rule with our team is that you're not allowed to ever give yourself your own nickname.
That's right.
Yeah, no, it was through Sean, and it was simply through training. It was just the way I trained. And I mean, and I think if people watch enough of my fights, I think I fought this is very similar. There wasn't a thought. It was just, you have one goal and it didn't really matter what was happening. The goal is going to be done. And it came from Sean. And it was my first kickboxing fight. So he never called me that. It was just when he introduced me in my first kickboxing bout, that was Mark the Machine. And that's when I got it. So it was a shock to me.
It's way better than the guy that we named Speed Bump because we found him passed out in the parking lot behind the bar.
I mentioned this last week on our host chat, but once a year I watch all the early UFC fights. And one of the things I want to ask you about is conditioning, because, you watch these old fights and Tank Abbott's not doing a lot of road work. And now, a guy like that, he'd have a real tough time hanging in. It seems like conditioning was a huge part of your work. And then how much do you think conditioning needs to be a part, like percentage wise, almost the way Hanshi asked about toughness of a fighter's career, but also what about when you retire and you're still an active martial artist? How important is the conditioning during that period?
Well, for the bout, I think conditioning is everything, because you have to be conditioned for everything, whether it's to be healthy, to be in shape, and there's so many aspects of the sport, right? Like you could be conditioned on the striking, but your wrestling conditioning is poor, right? So it just like MMA is such a grind where you have to train every aspect and you have to be conditioned in every aspect. So I think conditioning is almost the biggest part, because you have to be conditioned in the technique, conditioning in the actual amount of work you put in. So I think that's what separates a lot of the people. And then ongoing, I think for myself, it's just so instilled in me that, the work I love it. Like I love to train and like, it's just instilled in me that like, I'm always going to be putting in the long hours and the long amount of work. Obviously it changes from when I was competing, but I love to be on the mat and train.
Well, as time goes on, I think you see less and less of the beer-bellied old sensei. I think that is going a little bit. I mean, even if you look at this call, like nobody's that guy on here. And Sensei Dauphin, I know you're really into the functional fitness, and you are Sensei Suino. Do you guys want to talk a bit about that, like where that change came for non-competitive, or at very least non-professionally competitive athletes? Sensei Dauphin, what was your pivot to I'm doing karate and making sure I'm a machine? Not the machine, but a machine.
For me, Sean, you said it before. I don't want to say that. I have a similar, I really align with what the champ is saying. A lot of the things he's saying, I feel I was and am a similar martial artist. A couple of thoughts on that. You mentioned it, Sean, that when you came to the club, that was one of the things. I was in perpetual motion all the time. I just always figured if that guy does it 5 times and I do it 100 times, I must be going to be better at it than them, right? I never wanted to stand across the ring from somebody and think, holy shit, this guy outworked me. I'm in a spot now where they outworked me. And then today, when you ask that question, it's because I still love fighting. I still love sparring. I love it. I love to get in and move around. And I guess there's just the functional fitness stuff I do is more so that I can do this as long as I can. It's not about it's great if you're in good shape and people enjoy the way you look, but that's not why I do it. I don't do Turkish get-ups because I do Turkish get-ups so that if somebody has me on the ground, I might be able to pull my hips out from underneath me and have enough strength to shove them off of me with my shoulder or with my arm. And it's just fun to sweat and do that stuff. And I always feel great while I'm doing it. I'm excited to do it. I feel great while I'm doing it. And I feel really good when I'm done doing it. And I will say on the side, one thing I really like is when I'm sparring and after a couple of minutes, you see that person take their first deep breath and you haven't taken your first deep breath. That's fun to me when you're look at them and they go, and you're like, well, we're not there. I'm not there yet. So that's fun.
What about you, Sensei Suino? I mean, I know that not only are you incredibly in shape on your own, but you've helped inspire Sensei Dauphin there for our club that way. You've been a real bright light for that with that part of your training.
All the same reasons. And also, and I'd love to hear the champ expound on this a little bit. I think a life of martial arts makes you seek discipline for discipline's sake in a way. I don't feel like the day is right if I don't work toward bettering myself in some way. And a huge part of that is just the physical part, right? Whether it's exercise, training a kata and karate, grappling. I just don't feel right if I don't do that. So there's some nice blessings, right? Keeps you younger, allows you to do more stuff. But for me, I just wake up that way. I have to train. I'd love to hear what you have to say on that, champ.
No, 100% agree. You hit the nail on the head there. I do not feel right until I've done my workout. And no matter if I was away with the family, if I was at a hotel, if I'm on the road, the first thing I always do is get my workout in, get my training in. And that's, yeah, I 100% agree with what you just said.
I want to poke back to something you talked about real quick. In that mental state for some of those fights that didn't go your way, where you thought, what if, or I'm not sure. Do you think the answer would have been, if you were sitting across from your young self, fake it till you make it? Or is there another way to get, because you had certainty in those other fights you won, and that uncertainty is quite natural. Is it a fake it till you make it thing? Did you not do as much work? I wanted to go back to that because it stuck out for me.
A lot of the thing, if you look at my kickboxing record, is I was unbeaten. And again, because there's a lot less weapons. And again, I knew that I wasn't going to be broken or beaten there. That was my mindset, right? But in mixed martial arts, you're going against, say, an Olympic wrestler. Well, I'm not an Olympic wrestler, right? There's actual viable skill sets that you just do not have that they have. So that there is that uncertainty there. So that's where I kind of spoke to that. Is there, there's so many aspects. If you think about mixed martial arts, there's boxing, kickboxing, judo, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, all of the martial arts. So yeah, you are going to face a guy who no matter how you may try to trick yourself, no, you do not have that same level of skill as that person. And styles make fight in that sport where if you for me, wrestling was kind of a bit of my kryptonite, right? I just wasn't a super high level wrestler by any means. So if I was going against a high, that it has to be in the back of the head, right? So that's where I was hitting with the uncertainty there.
So I was going to ask you that, and you kind of answered it about the wrestling. Like you came at this out of the gate such a well-rounded practitioner. You weren't like, I'm a karate guy, I'm a grappler. You were almost like, I'm an MMA type guy. Obviously, the kickboxing being a strength. Wrestling was the one that came at you the most. Like, that's difficult for me. That's
For sure.
That's hard
like,
to solve that puzzle.
Yeah, my high school didn't have a wrestling team. So, I learned, a bit of grappling and takedowns through my martial arts training. But, if you're talking about a guy who wrestled NCAA or national level wrestling, it's just there's a different skill set, like anything, like it was boxing or anything. There are levels to any game or any sport. And that was one that, I felt I was behind for sure.
I'd love to know what you think of this. A Division I wrestling friend of mine, he's 50. He doesn't do it anymore, but he said to me, every moment in wrestling is 100% because the throw's 100%. It's not like you have to lay off right at the armbar or lay off right at the choke. Like, and it's like sparring. You obviously have to pull your punches. And he goes, that's why there's like every moment is 100% engagement. Is that part of what was difficult, or do you buy that when you're facing a wrestler? They only know 100%.
Yeah. So if you think about what the goal is in wrestling, you're trying to pin the other man to the mat, and he's trying to pin you to the mat as well. So you have two bulls locking horns, and who's going to pin the other guy to the mat, right? In American wrestling is that to a T. Right. Like the European style is a lot more technical and whatnot, but American wrestling is just who's the bigger dog, the meaner dog, the guy who's going to pin you on the mat. And I think, obviously martial arts is a fantastic thing to introduce your kids as a young age, but for a young, and I don't want to say boy or girl, if you put your young child in wrestling, you're going to learn a lot about yourself and a lot about toughness at a young age. And when you get put in wrestling, when you're pinned to the mat and you cannot get up, and that's your only goal is to get up, over and over and over, you're going to learn pretty quick how to be tough and how to become tougher. So I think wrestling is one of those sports that a young kid, that's a fantastic sport to put in.
Awesome. We have a sort of relaxed closing that we're not at yet, but before we start in that direction, I want to ask the senseis, is there any questions you want to get in before we do start going around the horn?
I'm curious about your transition into becoming a trainer and operating your own fitness facility, Adrenaline. Like, did you know that like way back? Did Sean Tompkins start talking to you about this? Were you kind of dabbling in that before you started fighting? How'd you get to there?
Well, Adrenaline came about when Sean moved on to Vegas to run the gym down there, Extreme Couture. So we kind of took over Sean's gym. And when we started the business, the goal was for us to have a place to train, an elite place to train. It kind of morphed into, okay, this is our business now after we all retired. But the second part with being a coach in the dojo is very easy for me because I'm teaching my mindset, my skill set, my, what I've been taught. I'm kind of, I don't want to say regurgitating, but I'm doing what I was saying, which is Sean is trying to lead by example of what I do. On the other side, it's very tough sometimes for me to be a coach because I feel that every fighter should have the same mindset and approach as I do, where they don't. Every fighter, every athlete has a different mindset, has a different skill set, has a different approach to fighting, where I assume they have the same as mine. And maybe that's being stubborn, but it's tough sometimes to think, hey, why aren't they going forward? Why aren't they biting down on their mouth guard and getting in the trenches? So sometimes it's hard being a coach or to a fighter, right? But it's easy to be an instructor at the gym because I'm leading by example of what I think, what I feel.
Sensei, I see you really connecting with that idea. Do you want to open that up at all?
No, I agree with that. I don't necessarily want to open it up. I just, so much of what the champ is saying are things that resonate with me. They resonate with me because I know that they also resonate with Sensei Legacy, because I didn't come up with those things independently. He taught them to me, and I did accept that. And I guess one of the thoughts that comes to mind is, while people approach fighting with their own style and their own, again, Sensei Suino has said this: in order to be good at something, you first have to be willing to be awful at it. You have to first be willing to be terrible at it in order to be good at it. I like that. And in the time when you're terrible, you have to be very trusting of the people who know. Right. And so when I was terrible at karate, and I would go to Sensei Legacy and say, I keep trying to do that thing you say, and they're just handing me my ass. Like, I keep picking myself up on the other side of the room. He just keeps saying, just keep doing it. Bite down on your mouthpiece, keep trying to do it. Then what I found is when I did commit myself to it, and when it worked once out of 100 times, it was easier for it to work 3 times out of 100 times. And then, you keep making exponential progress on that until now it's working, let's say 95 out of 100 times. Probably never works 100 out of 100 times, but.
Right on. So what we do, champ, is we go around, we share our thoughts and what we enjoyed about the show and chatting with you. But before we do that, is there anything you want to talk about that you're doing right now, or anything you want to promote, or anything going back to any aspect of what we talked about you just want to get into?
It was great, to connect with martial artists, and I respect, all your stories, and I appreciate hearing those. And like I said, the first thing I said when I got on the thing is that I really appreciate the lineage that you guys have, the respect to your instructors and the respect to the path you've taken to martial arts, and showing that and kind of verbalizing that, so that, I can relate to that. So that's very nice. But yeah, same thing. Like, myself, I'm about my gym and I'm about my family, and that's it. That's my kind of goal. That's my day to day, and that's how I live my life right now.
Love that. Hanchi?
Could you tell us, like we talked about your past and everything, could you tell us at your club who, when, and what the arts or what you teach there, who are some other, besides yourself, important persons in your club?
You bet. So the thing that we're all under. So the 3 kind of the students, top students for Sean, was Chris Radecki, Sam Stout, and myself. We owe it to Sean to carry on what he taught in us, and it's the same 3 owners that started it, and it's going to be the same 3 owners that carried on. So those are the 3 our owners that carry on kind of Sean's tradition and his lineage. We have a black belt in jiu-jitsu, Jesse Goff, who is fantastic. We have a lot of young up-and-comer kids that are we're passing on the same kind of training and skill set that Sean taught us. But yeah, it's the same group, and I think that's a big thing, is loyalty. Not just in martial arts, but in life. A lot of people like to talk about it. Very few people like to live it. And I hope that we're living it and proving to Sean that we're carrying on what he taught us, and the skill set and mindset that he passed on to us.
Have you seen Leo lately?
So COVID's been tough. So he's at the police college. So before COVID, because there's a couple of outbreaks because he's at the Ontario Police College teaching now.
Yeah.
So he was in the street, and then he went back to more of an instructor role. And there was a couple of outbreaks. So just out of kind of respect for that, he hasn't been at the gym due to COVID. But when we're open, he's there, I would say twice a week, working with young fighters and young people that want to learn from him. And I always love to see that. And a big thing, again, like I was saying about leading by example, is I always show respect to him, and I always expect the same from my students, and they do. So I always appreciate that.
You know, before we go around the horn, I do want to say, you know, the way you're talking about this generally mixed martial arts idea is so in line with how we talk about our classical martial arts. Just that respect of lineage, that respect for the one who brung you, the respect for your seniors, even if they weren't your sensei, as we would call it. Like, is that what Sean instilled in you? And is that more prevalent in MMA than we think? Because you're speaking really classically, and we all love it.
Like I think I do have more of a mindset of someone from a traditional martial arts background, for sure. Because, you know, mixed martial arts now, like a lot of people learn it from TV, you know, like from watching the UFC and, oh, I want to get into that. Or they came from, you know, they could have came from wrestling or background or wrestling or boxing, right? Which are not traditional martial arts, right? So most people that come into mixed martial arts are not coming from a traditional background and a traditional mindset. So no, so I agree there that it generally mixed martial arts does not have that feel. Right. Our gym, I think, does, or we try to instill that in the students, because, you know, we have like a grading system, and we've tried to do that in our style, like instituting that. So we do have the values. But again, like, you know, if a kid comes into the gym that, you know, that they're not, saying yes, sensei, or yes, sir, which I grew up with. And I you know, it's kind of hard for me to kind of see that a lot of times. I wish we had more of that. It's like, you know, you come into the mat and you show respect to the instructor. Yes, sir. You know, if someone asks me a question, yes, sir. You know, like, but again, that's also a generation thing. I think that's kind of changed over time as well. You know, because even, you know, my kids call their friends' parents by their first name, where I would have called them Mr. or Mrs. Right. So so part of it's a generational thing as well.
Right on. Thanks for that answer. I really appreciate that. So yeah, we're going to go around and each of us is going to say a little something, and the last word will go to you before we do a little housekeeping to let everyone know what's coming up. Hanshi Legacy, what do you want to say about our evening?
Well, it was great to see you again, Mark. I hope that I really hope that in the future, when things get together a little bit more, that maybe we can have you over to our place, and maybe we can go and see you at your place like we did before.
You bet.
And the best for you on the recovery of your dojo or your club.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right.
Sensei Suino? Thanks, Hanshi.
Champ, I love how you vibe with the traditional martial arts setting. One of the things I was going to comment on earlier is a lot of the fights I watched, I saw you talking to Sean in between rounds or before and after the fight, and how you guys had this wonderful relationship that does remind me of a classical, although I suspect he was closer to your age, but kind of, it does remind me of a sensei-student relationship. And your love for him and respect, right? The fact that you're living into his tradition, that shows very brightly through everything you say and do. So thank you for sharing that stuff with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sensei. Sensei Dauphin?
Well, Champ, listen, I pontificate a little longer than the others. I like to give a good introduction because I like you to know that we're really grateful to have you come on and chat with us about this. And I also like to write notes. If you see me, I'm paying attention. I'm just writing things that stood out to me in my mind. And I always like you to know that I was paying attention and I learned things from you. Just like everybody else, I like how much you pay respect to the past and to the people who helped you. I think that's amazing. I'm always going to be chuckling a little bit when I think of you at 13 with your white wife beater on, thinking you were the king of the world, and somebody choking you out, which I think it's awesome that you talk about that. I loved hearing you talk about Carlos Newton. Every time I've seen that guy, I've just been enamored by him. He's just so cool. To see you, think of you with your hoodie on under your gi in August because you're trying to emulate such a great Canadian fighter. I really gotta say, like, being 15 and just saying I want to fight the adults, very unusual, I think, and good on you for doing that. A lot of similar things, Champ. I had a super protective mother. Didn't want me to fight, didn't want me to do martial arts. Also got a little bit jealous when I really got so into it and I just wasn't coming home as much, because I'm actually from Windsor and I went to Western, and that's where I met Sensei Legacy. And I remember being super embarrassed at my yellow belt grading when my mom marched across the floor to tell Sensei Legacy sitting at the table that she'd like to see me a little more, and him just kind of chuckling and saying, well, we can share them, okay? How about we share them? Right. So I think of your mom a little bit like my mom when you're talking about that. I really like that you said your ultimate goal was to fight in Japan. I think that also speaks to your classical mindset and how that affected you, and just how it impacted you being there and them clapping for you. I think it gave you a different perspective that a lot of fighters don't get. Like I said, you went to the University of Windsor and you're from London area. I went to the University of Western Ontario and I'm from the Windsor area. So we kind of like did that on the path. I just did it maybe about 10 years before you. I like when you said running, those things, individual sports, it's on you. It's not on anybody else. It's on you. You're the one who has to do it, and that you like that. You said this so many times. Action speaks louder than words. You must have said lead by example like 15 times. And I think that's super important. I think if you're in a position to guide somebody, you have to lead by example, not at the front of the room with your mouth. You have to lead by example with your body and your mouth and your actions. So I like that. I actually did spend a little bit of time at the Windsor Amateur Boxing Club myself. So it's nice to know that we have that in common. I like when you said that, it's tedious to be repetitive over and over and over again. It gets tedious, but you have to do it. And it reminded me of something that Sensei Legacy said way back in over 30 years ago. It's mindful repetition. You have to be mindfully repetition. You have to make your body and your mind do it over and over and over again for it to be a reaction. I like what you just said a couple of minutes ago, loyalty, that you live it and that you defer so strongly to Sean Tompkins, who I know in our community is just, he's a legend and he was gone way too soon. I really like that you said you were at peace with fighting because you had new and more important priorities, which was that your daughter was coming, and that made it all the easiest. And I really like, Champ, what a family man you are. Like, it's awesome today to hear a handsome man, an alpha guy, be devoted to his family and not be ego driven. And so thank you so much. I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to chat with you tonight. So thank you.
I know, it was very kind words, and I appreciate it. And like it was great to speak with other martial artists. And again, same thing. You respect your lineage, and I respect all you guys, and I appreciate you guys, carrying on the tradition of martial artists, and it's still alive and well. So,
thank you, Champ.
Really appreciate that, Champ. Yeah, the two things I just want to touch on, he just mentioned it, but the utter lack of ego. And I'm sure you'd go, no, there were periods, but when you're talking about your journey, it's just so transparent and clear, and the humility around the wins, the losses, the choices. It's really lovely to watch. And Sensei Dauphin mentioned Jean-Yves Thériault, and in a similar vein, everything you say demystifies these organizations, these things, and it comes down to training, and it comes down to, again, repetitive basics. I wrote down mindful repetition, and I love that because there is magic here. And there is fantasy that gets us in the room, and we watch those movies and get excited, but it's that, are you getting up at 5 again tomorrow or not? And I really like the way you and Jean-Yves Thériault and everyone I respect who trains, including the senseis on this call, it's like, are you doing it again tomorrow or aren't you? That's where the magic comes from, not from feeling magic or thinking magic, but from doing the grunt work. And you really made that so clear. And I just want to say thanks, because anytime this stuff gets demystified, I just go, yay, there's a path if I want it. And I get to be a student hearing that. So thanks for that. Anything you want to say before I throw it back for the housekeeping?
No, I appreciate it. It was a great conversation today, and a lot of like-minded individuals. So I appreciate that.
I look forward to meeting you in person, Champ.
Right on.
Sensei Dauphin, you want to let our audience know what's coming up?
Yeah, so next week we'll be off, sadly. Boo-hoo. I mean that truly. Like,
Yeah.
I don't like our week off, but we need it. So we'll take a week off. And then a person who's on this call, Sensei Alpanekia, who has been described to me by Sensei Suino. I've never met him, but as a original gangster of judo from back in the day. And I'm interested to hear what any OG gangster in martial arts has to say about back in the day. Because I do like the lineage and I like hearing about the past. We have another OG in karate, Sensei Ron Lindsay, who's going to be coming on. And Sensei Lindsay goes back to, like, he's one of those Marines who was stationed in Okinawa for a long time and learned from a lot of those classical karate teachers, and was a really good friend and compatriot to Sensei Legacy's teacher, Anthony Sandoval. So I'm just really interested to crack things open with those two. And then, of course, we'll have a host chat where it's just the four of us, where we do a lot of swearing and burping, talking about different things. So that's what that's been.
Thanks for that, Sensei Dauphin. Really excited. And by the way, you know, it's funny because we're talking about time. My lady has her vacation in the month of July. So it'll be a year since me in Quebec having to find a hotel when we did our chat with Bill Superfoot Wallace. And that'll be the same thing. I'm not sure what our road trip's going to look like, but she'll know that whatever Thursday we're on, we'll have to be in a nice hotel with good Wi-Fi. Thanks so much, Senseis. Thanks so much, Champ. And I'm not exaggerating. I'm literally going to go down and sit in front of, I'm at UFC 9, so I'm going to watch that one tonight. I'm a big fan of that organization. I'm a big fan that we got to chat with someone who's been to the show. And it's really nice to hear that that's not the most important thing in your life. And I just want to say what a treat. Thanks, everybody. Be safe. We're always honored when you come and watch us, whether it's on YouTube, whether you listen on our podcast. I haven't mentioned that enough lately, but on all the podcasting platforms, you can find us. And of course, here on Zoom. Good night, everybody. See you next week.
Good night, everybody. Thanks, Champ. Nice seeing you, everyone.
Hope the Canadians won, guys.
All right. Yeah.